Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Start, Grow and Monetize Your Podcast with me, James Burtt, and the podpreneur, Alex Chisnall. He hates my intros, but I don't care. I'm just going to keep going with them. So today on the pod, we are going to be talking about how to pitch your show for your dream guests. Now, if you get this right, this can be the difference that makes all the difference. Imagine that person who is a big name, big in the game in your space, in that micro niche that you're trying to become an influence within, and you could get that person on who's maybe got a massive following. They could promote you across their newsletters. They could promote you across LinkedIn, Instagram, and all that kind of good stuff. It is possible if you approach people in the right way. Even if you've got a relatively new show, a small show, a niche show, or a completely brand new show, if you pitch the concept of the podcast in the right way and presuppose the audience and the value that that guest is going to get, then there is a definite way to get your dream guest on your show. I have done it myself with a brand new show that had no listeners. I got Grant Cardone on. He's quite big in the game in terms of like sales and marketing and all that kind of good stuff. And it was a bit of a game changer for the podcast and the perception of the podcast. So guesting, how to get those dream people. Chisnall, what you got for us?
Okay, so I agree with regards to... And look...
You're someone who's had some mega guests on, by the way.
Yeah, and again, some of them, obvious example for me being a Lewis Howes, who I got on really early doors.
Still so jealous.
And I've tried to go back and get him a few times since, but nothing back, even from the personal email,
Really?
Yeah.
Give out the personal emails and everyone can hit him up and tell him he's nasty.
Okay.
I thought you were going to do it.
I nearly did do it. But sometimes it's going to take a while to get the guests, and you need to put the work in, and kind of allude to that a little bit more. But as an example, Lewis Howes I got very early on, something like I think episode 20 something.
Wasn't it episode 1 Bartlett you had on?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. But it took me something like 9 months to get Lewis. Like I messaged him like when I got Bartlett, and then I waited 5 months before I launched. By the time I got Lewis, about 9 months had gone by, and I'd kind of given up. But he was, quite often it goes this way. And you can get quite tactical with this as well, in that he was bringing out a second book.
Yes.
He was looking to go on a podcast tour, i.e. guesting on as many podcasts as possible in a short period of time. Just seen Simon Squibb do it, like 8 interviews in one day type thing.
That's right,
you hammer it, absolutely hammer it. And you can get super tactical because people bringing out new books. And again, depending on what niche you're podcasting, bringing out new music, bringing out new programs if you're
courses,
in courses, all that kind of stuff. And you can work that out. You can go to, Waterstone's website, for example, and see when new books are being published, what season that book's coming out. So you can then, find out who the agent is, who the PR team is, contact and then publisher, all of those things. And you're going to have far more success, in my opinion, and this is what's worked for me over the years, is by personalising the outreach to that person. Okay?
There's nothing worse than spammy generic outreach, is there? Nothing
worse, and we both get it on a daily basis for people wanting to guest on our shows. But for me, you've got to personalise it. So by that I mean you're not just saying, I love Lewis Howes, I love your podcast. How many of those does he get? Fanboy, fangirl emails. You want to, for me, specify something like, I really like your podcast show. I really like your book. Yeah. I really like this chapter in the book. Yes. I really like this page in the book. I really like this line in the book. So again, a little bit of the niche. You're getting super specific, super dialed in, forensic on exactly...
You're obsessed with that flipping word.
Forensic on getting that guest on your show by making it so personal that you make them a little bit curious. You plant a seed in their head. Yes, you also want to blow a bit of smoke up their arse. It's not going to be remiss of you to do it. And you want to be super strategic as to who you can get. I gave an example before of getting Evan Carmichael on my show, like a big Canadian YouTuber, and him saying to me how he got Tony Robbins on his show. And it was like looking at who Tony Robbins followed on social media and interviewing a bunch of people on his YouTube channel who Tony Robbins followed.
Oh, smart.
And then Tony Robbins actually approached him and was like, why aren't I on your podcast? Because you've interviewed. And he reeled off all the names of his friends, because his friends had gone, I've just been on this really cool YouTube channel. Boom, 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 boom. Over time, gets back to Tony Robbins. And over time, he goes, Tony Robbins and I are now in business. We've got 3 businesses together. And his number one dream guest was Tony Robbins. So it's like, boom.
Yeah.
You know.
There's a few ways of like really I think there's great points there about when to approach people and how to approach in terms of like like making it very, very personable. One of the things that I found to work super well is actually voice notes. Because what I find is that, but again, using the personalisation and the strategic nature of it. So, for example, I listened to, this was years ago now, but it was still a good example of it. It was when Joe
Rogan.
Wicks.
Oh.
Joe Wogan. Who's Joe Wogan?
Rogan.
Oh, Rogan. I think he said Wogan. I was like, what is he? Terry Wogan's son. Joe Wicks, when he was like the...
That's Paul Wogan.
Is it? Okay. Or Mark Wogan. Do you know that he's actually got a son called Mark Wogan?
That's the one I meant. He has a podcast.
Pizza. He does. Yeah, he's got a podcast. Anyway, circle back. So Joe Wicks was during... Home In. Don't want to say it just in case the algorithm doesn't like it, but it's during Home In. And if you're on YouTube, I'll mad at you. And he was the UK's PE teacher or whatever it was. Do you remember he did like Fit with Joe and he became like massive? But just when that was happening, I remember he was on the High Performance podcast. And there's a really good bit about how long he'd been on YouTube for. Great lesson actually for people who listen to this podcast. Joe Wicks looked like he'd blown up out of nowhere. Looked like he'd just become this mega superstar. He did like Lean in 15 cookbooks. Remember when he was on Vine and he chucked them on, he used to chuck the food in the pan and cook it and be like, oh, right, lovely jubbly, here's my food today. But he'd been on YouTube for 7 years and nobody cared. For 7 years he'd been on. And that's what he said on High Performance Podcast, which is a podcast that you and I both know. We know the people involved in that.
Overnight success then, wasn't he?
Overnight success that had taken 7 years in the making. But that was his whole point, was that he was willing to put in the reps and sets when nobody else was. So I reached out to him and I said, and I did it via a voice note. I'd never done it before, but I was like, let me just try it. So I literally voice noted him and said, hey, Joe, my name's James. I've just been listening to the High Performance Podcast. I loved the episode. I thought it was brilliant. I'm a big
That's the blowing smoke up the arse bit.
There you go. I really like Jake and Damien anyway. I actually know Damien and the guys over there quite well. But I loved when he asked you about this particular thing. And when you said about the fact you've been at YouTube for 7 years before anyone cared, I just thought that was amazing. Anyway, I appreciate you probably get this all the time. I've got a podcast. It's aimed at UK entrepreneurs and business owners.
Like it's specific.
Our audience, I'm giving it specific.
Forensic.
Specificity. We talk to small business owners. They're generally UK based and around Europe. And I just gave a little bit of insight about what the podcast was. Again, I'm sure that you get a bunch of these, but if you'd ever want to come on when you're doing a book tour or you're doing something around blah, blah, blah.
Make it about him.
And you want to talk to an audience of early stage entrepreneurs and business owners that are primarily based in the UK, I'd love to have you on. But again, I appreciate you probably get loads of these. Thanks again for the content. Cheers for everything you do with PE with Joe. It's really inspiring. Thanks very much. Left the voice note. I then send a screenshot of the podcast in the top 20. And then I send a text.
So adding a bit of credibility, extra smoke blowing up the arse.
Exactly. So then I say as well, just thought I'd send you this screenshot so you know it's not just I'm not just some random dude in my bedroom making a podcast.
And how much money did you send?
$15,000. No, and he agreed to come on the show.
Did he?
He agreed to come on the show. So that was the process. There was voice note, credibility, screenshot, and then text. Because my thinking with it is that people, especially celebrities, they're not going to click a picture before you're connected, because you never know what's going to be on that picture. Yeah. They're probably never going to click a video, because again, you never just know what's on a video. But on a voice note, it's just a bit of audio. Like you can't download anything. You can't hack into someone's phone. It's not going to be like they've got naughty content on their device, if that makes sense. It seems like a fairly easy thing to do. So I could see that straight away, because it said, it had been seen. So I knew he'd got it. Okay. And then he came back to me straight away.
Did he? And look, sometimes that's going to go to their, whatever it's called in there, the spam folder, and they're not going to action it. And also, look, in my experience, timing has a lot to do with it, and I think it's just evidenced by what you've done.
Yeah.
I remember this time last year getting Roxy Nafusi, who wrote a book called Manifest. Absolutely, and she agreed. It was December the 4th, I can remember. She agreed to be interviewed on December the 4th by me. She'd just been on the High Performance podcast, but she was very early. She just released this book.
Yeah.
And then she cancelled on me, which happens a lot in December, you'll find podcasters.
Happens a lot full stop, by the way, but even worse in December, yeah.
Even worse in December. And I never got her back on. And I've tried many times since, but she is blown up. She's now on the front cover of Vogue. She's,
it went mad, didn't it?
She's working one-on-one with like Serena Williams and people like that. And you're like, okay, the timing just wasn't right. But another example of that was one DM on LinkedIn to Piers Lenny, who I just met today for a catch up, and he'd just come off Dragon's Den and deleted all of his social media accounts and was coming back and was going, if I ever going to make use of the platform that's given me by being on that TV show, then I kind of need to do it now. And I happened to be hosting an event. My offer was to, put him up, pay for his petrol, no fees involved, didn't have the money. It was the first year I ever put on that event. And it was like my annual, screw it, just do it podcast event, a couple of hundred, 150 people, maybe something like that, I think, bunch of speakers. And he was the headline speaker. Barclays then came in and again, somebody I knew happened to be in a senior position at Barclays, went to them, told them what the day was all about, told them the speaker lineup, the credibility of Piers, landed it. They wrote me, a substantial check that covered all of the expenses for the day and the likes of that. And I managed to get Piers, and it was one DM on LinkedIn, and it was just the timing was right at that time.
But also just to reiterate again with the Piers thing, because that has then led on to you becoming quite good pals with him, you doing a lot of other business stuff with him, you launching his podcast, him becoming a client of yours, you doing other subsequent events that he can now talk on. You've ended up brokering deals for him with things like LinkedIn, which is, the fact that you've got that credibility that you can leverage
LinkedIn
is
learning
probably,
courses.
Very useful.
Yeah.
So there's loads of these benefits. But because the other thing I think is on the flip side of the coin of these guesting conversations, I had somebody on my podcast 2018 it must have been, who was massive at the time. This is when Instagram was just sort of really becoming super hot, and they had like 500,000, 1 million followers, something like that. Super engaged audience. We did a recording with them. We've done YouTube with them. We hired out a boxing ring to go and do a boxing thing in Southeast London. We've done all this stuff, and I gave them a trackable link. We've done videos, shorts, clips, photos, and this is before like shorts were a thing. We'd be making these snippets and these trailers before trailers were as a thing. This is 2018, don't forget. I gave them a trackable link. They posted it. They did, to their credit. They posted it on their main feed. They posted it on their stories, which is going that far back. You could only post on stories with a link if you had more than 10,000 subscribers or followers back in the day.
That,
and they had like 500,000 odd. It drove 96 clicks. 96 clicks. So I guess the message here, excuse me, is as well as it, yes, it's super important to get the right guests on. Yes, it can be an absolute game changer for your podcast. Yes, it can be credibility. It can be network building. It can give you a new audience, but it also can fall completely flat on its face. And it might be those podcast guests where it's like someone who's quite well known in their niche or their sector, but hasn't got a big outward presence, or maybe they've got a good, just a good engaged following. That will be the thing that drives you the most downloads, surprisingly, to your podcast.
Yeah. And I think I've given this example to you before. I don't know if I said it in the podcast, but when I interviewed Daniel Priestley, well-known Aussie entrepreneur living in the UK, and he'd said to me he'd been on Diary CEO podcast, and this was, I think at the time, about 6 weeks before he came on mine. It had gone live, and he'd said he'd made over $1 million in revenue from that podcast, and he saw the value in going on podcasts for that very reason. And I remember sending you the raw recording and going, this was one of the most amazing episodes I've ever had, in that he's literally given me
the playbook,
on how to start, grow and monetize a business and to build your personal brand. And I felt like I'd literally gone in and paid 50 grand for a masterclass, but he never promoted that episode once. And I thought, hang on, you've come all the way, and I can't remember where, from wherever you are in London to the studio. So you've probably taken an hour minimum for the travel bit, because he arrived early. You've done the podcast for an hour, hung around afterwards for a little bit, having a chinwag with me, which is, again, massively important part of the experience for me. And then probably taking another hour to get home. So you've probably taken minimum 2.5 hours.
That was half a day.
Half a day. Half a day. Yet we delivered, and if you're listening, Daniel, you're welcome on any time, or you're welcome to promote that episode at any time. But I was just kind of like, just didn't get it, because he just told me, and yes, my podcast isn't Diary of a CEO, but if you get podcasting and you get that's what's just done for you on that podcast, we've given you all the assets, we've even written the post for you. Why wouldn't you just do it? Just press the button, or pass it on to someone in your team, which is big enough. We know his team's big enough to be able to do that for you. So you can line everything up, have the most amazing conversation, but as you say, sometimes it can just fall flat, and it is what it is. You move on to the next one.
We'll actually talk about working with guests as a separate side note to this, because there's a whole bunch of ways to, once you've done the show, once you've got the content, Alex and his team do a really, really good job, because we've done some sort of collaborative podcasts together before. Your squad does a really good job of
that's good,
putting it together, sending it out, making it super easy, which is one of the key things when you're working with it. It's one thing to pitch a guest and to get them on. It's another thing to get good quality content out of them, and then also to get them to share your content with their audience as well. So we'll do that in a subsequent episode. So if you'd like to listen to that episode that's coming up, don't know when because we've not recorded it yet, but make sure you hit the follow button or the subscribe button, because otherwise you might miss it. And while you're there, hitting follow or subscribe on YouTube or on the podcast
Leave
apps.
us a comment.
Leave us a comment and leave us a 5-star review, and let us know what you're thinking of this kind of content. Click the link as well in the show notes if you'd like to find out more about our free to join podcast community called Pod School. It has got free training. There's Q&A sessions. There's an amazing community of people. We do weekly sessions and all kinds of different stuff. We've got alumni interviews. We've got guest episodes from the podcast industry and loads of other cool stuff as well to help you to start, grow and monetize your podcast. Cheers for your ears. We'll see you on the next one.